Welcome. Spiritual teachers and gurus emphasize getting in touch with and becoming one with our higher self. From the many guidelines that have been taught, we'll look at the top 7 practical steps to purify and tune our vehicles of consciousness, our minds, our hearts, and our bodies to become one with the consciousness of the divine self. First of all, I'd like to define what the higher self is by starting with the levels of consciousness in a human being that Helena Blavatsky gave us. She was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society. I'd like to start with the physical body at the bottom, the Sthula Sharira, which is Sanskrit, and then the body-mind. Now, that's a term I use for the autonomic nervous system, which makes our heart beat, and it beats faster when we run. It also includes the protective mechanisms of the body, like when you pull your hand away from a hot stove. We don't even have to think about it. The body, not mind, is also the storehouse of our habitual body movements, like when we're driving. We can be talking or thinking about anything else but driving, but when a red light comes on, we come to a perfect stop. Now, we need these habitual patterns in our lives, but the body-mind also activates our defense mechanisms of fight, flight, and freeze from the amygdala. Now, you can see that's the lower part of the brain. Now, the fight, flight, and freeze are useful in fleeing from a threat, like getting under a table or something like that in an earthquake. But they're not useful when we're interacting with a family member. They're usually too strong, and the adrenaline that comes up can turn into an amygdala hijack if a person gets easily irritated at their spouse, uses sarcasm, or raises their voice. Or on this other side of it, if a person walks away in a huff or shuts down and won't talk. So this is the reason why some of the emotions can get triggered from the body-mind. So moving back to the next level of consciousness, we have the Linga Sharira, and this is the etheric double or the astral double. And it's within the body and extends a bit off the skin. And you can feel it, you can sense it, you can feel the heat of the body, but there's also a subtle springiness with the energy coming off the body. Then next we have prana. Now that's the vitality and the energy within the body, and it also extends off the body. China calls it chi, and in Japan, it's ki. Then we have kama. That's the desire body, the emotions. And when it's mixed with our minds, it's called kama manas. And kama manas is our everyday mind that goes after things we want or need, such as our desires to organize our lives, or if we have to go to the grocery store, this kind of thing. So manas can also be combined with buddhi manas. That's the field of intuition. So that's the higher mind with our higher reasoning and intuitive insight. And then buddhi is the field of intuition, and Atman is the absolute, the field of unity, or some call it God. And just a comment, there's no my Atman or your Atman. Atman is the same in all of us. It's the absolute in everything. So here is a chart that describes the personal everyday self, and that's the physical body, the body mind, our emotions, and our lower mind. And then the spiritual higher self is the higher mind, which receives intuition and utilizes reason and wisdom. and then the intuition, and then the absolute or the Atman. This is what the higher self is and what we're yearning to become one with. So to decide on the 7 best ways to get in touch with a higher self, I'd like to start with guidelines from spiritual teachings from around the world. And these will give you a taste of the various principles and instructions and really how similar they are. And as you look at these, see what you would pick out as the 7 most important ways to become your higher self. So first of all, I'd like to look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Now, he was a 2nd century before current era sage in India, and he gave us 5 guidelines to live in the world, or yamas. And you'll see these are common around the world. So nonviolence, telling the truth, not stealing, sexual fidelity, and then detachment. That's not holding on to things, and a sense of dispassion. And it comes from the root pari, graha, and then graha means to grasp. And then a in front of it means to not holding on to things, having no jealousy. And you're going to see this is similar as we proceed with other guidelines. And then Patanjali gave us 5 right personal behaviors, niyamas, cleanliness, contentment, and that's with our emotions, and then self-control. Now that's eating right or using social skills like not interrupting people. This is tapas. And another perfect examples of this example is a pregnant woman who may refrain from using alcohol when she's pregnant. Now that's tapas. Then we have self-study, and that's reading and self-learning of spiritual scriptures. And then self-surrender. This is surrendering our individual ego to the divine and letting go. And it involves accepting our karma and the situation that we're in our lives. So those 2 first sections are added to with 6 more guidelines for spiritual development. And these get us into meditation. So first of all, asana is the right frame of mind for meditation. Now, you may have heard of the term asana in a yoga class as the pillow or cushion to sit on with meditation, but it's also the right attitude for meditation, letting go. Then we have pranayama. Now that is some breath exercises before meditation, but it also can be looked at as a wider, it's the right communication with all living creatures. And that's because we use our breath for this. And then so getting into meditation, there's pratyahara, withdrawal of attention from sense objects, like what we're sensing with our bodies and our emotions. And then deeper meditation is dharana, or concentration, centering the mind on the self. Contemplation is dhyana, and samadhi is the highest meditation of total absorption in the self. So I'd like to also share with you Shankara's, roughly 800 years later, his guidelines for how to become your higher self. Now, Acharya on the end of Shankara, Shankara Acharya means wise one or teacher or sage. Now, he gave us Hindu virtues, 8 of them, and they start with viveka, realizing the difference between the real and the unreal. Now, that's the difference between the eternal or the God within us and everything versus our worldly existence in our everyday lives. So I'd like to just share with you for the real or the Atman, Blavatsky gives us a definition for what we might call God. And she says it's the one life, the omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle, which transcends the power of human conception. It is unthinkable and unspeakable. It cannot be defined. So Viveka is sensing the higher self in the versus the personal self. Now, this is very important, hint, hint, and for what we're looking at in the 7 top choices to become your higher self. So back to these Hindu virtues, the second is vairagya, detachment, and that's similar to aparigraha, and it's detachment, desirelessness. And this one's also very important, hint, hint. So then Shankara gave us 6 treasures, and they are calmness of mind, or shama, self-restraint, or dhamma. Now that's control of our emotions and the senses in our bodies, which translate down to our behavior. Then these 2, shama and dhamma, result in aparati, mind centered on the Atman, or the higher self. And to live in the world and to accomplish this, we need titiksha, or endurance. And this is both in meditation and in dhamma, or self-restraint, and in our minds. Then we have samadhana, or concentration, and this is a one-pointed mind. And then shraddha, faith, or confidence in what we are doing will aid us both spiritually and in our lives. And the issues that come up will help us with our spiritual growth. Doing the best we can in our lives and helping our families. Then lastly, the final one is love, or unity with Atman, mumukshutvam. Then moving to the 10 commandments of Christianity, and Judaism is very similar, as well as the Quran in Islam. The first one is, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Then Judaism has another with regard to the Lord, or God. Then honor the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother. And then these common guidelines, thou shalt not kill, or commit adultery, or steal, or bear false witness against thy neighbor. In other words, don't lie. And then thou shalt not covet, or be jealous of thy neighbor, or covet anything of thy neighbor's. Now in Judaism, these last 2 are combined. Then moving to the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism, and I wanted to include what I've written after the arrow, and I came across this, and they're just beautifully describing the principles here. So right view is seeing things in the right way, which leads to understanding and wisdom. Right intention is resolving to do right, which leads to divine inclination. Right speech is speaking or thinking properly, which leads to truth. Right action is appropriate behavior, leading to goodwill. Then right livelihood is earning our income in ethical ways, which leads to sharing. Right effort leads to the highest outcome. Right mindfulness is being aware of what we're doing and not acting unconsciously. That's becoming aware of how we act, and it leads to purposeful living. Right concentration leads to the absorption in the unity of all. And this is with regard to meditation. So one theosophical book that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, given to us by Blavatsky, and again from the Theosophical Society, and is The Voice of the Silence. And in it are the paramitas of Buddhism, which I'd like to include here. They're just beautiful. And they include how one can become our higher self. So the first is charity, or dana. That's generosity and helpfulness, and it's love for others. Then shila is moral conduct. Patience, sweet, which naught can ruffle, is kshanti. And then here we see vairagya again, detachment and desirelessness. And then next we have valor, or heroism. And that's the dauntless energy that fights for truth. So we need this virya when we're following our conscience, because we really have to sometimes fight ourselves when we're doing the right thing. Then with meditation, we have dhyana, contemplation, and then the divine wisdom of the self is prajna. Then I'd like to share the 5 precepts of Taoism. Now, these 5 have been more recently defined, but I'd want to include them here. So now the picture is Lao Tzu, a philosopher a while back from China. Now, it also can be a collection of all the aphorisms and teachings. So anyway, these Taoist principles include do not kill or steal or engage in sexual misconduct, do not speak falsely or lie, do not get intoxicated, but always think of pure conduct. So to add to these, I'd like to share, excuse me, from Chinese philosophy, we are told about the Tao, and that's very similar to the Atman or Blavatsky's one life. This is unnameable, the principle pervading everything. And then Wei, Wu, Wei is doing, not doing, or going with the flow with detachment and acceptance. Knowing that what we are dealing with is where we are supposed to be. And again, that's similar to vairagya. So just having this acceptance with doing, not doing. Then the last principle is the uncarved block, and it represents return to unity and alignment with the Tao or the Atman. And so we start our existences, our primordial condition, as an uncarved block. And as we develop ourselves and our personalities, we have aspects that are both good and bad within ourselves. This takes place over many lifetimes. And then with this, we are carving into the block, representing attributes of ourselves. Then when we want to become one with the higher self, we try to get back to the uncarved block through detachment and eliminating desire and self-purification as we learn to get rid of defense mechanisms and patterns of our interactions that may get in our way. So this gives you an introduction to the various guidelines from around the world. So the first proven way to become your higher self, I've picked Viveka from Shankaracharya, and I gave you a hint about this. Now, Viveka is the first of the Hindu virtues, and they're included in Shankaracharya's book, Viveka Chudamani, or the Crest Jewel of Wisdom. And this is an excellent book, very easy to read. I highly recommend it. Now, viveka is discernment or judgment to discriminate between the real and the unreal. Now, this is the difference between the Atman, the God within us and everything, and the everyday world, which is a temporary existence. This is done with the discernment of the higher mind. Now, we use discrimination or discernment every day as we pick between right and wrong, using our conscience to follow rules of behavior or following our own integrity. And we discriminate also how much money we spend so we don't go into debt, or how much sugar or food we eat so as to not gain weight. So viveka is sensing the Atman, or the God in everything, or the unity of life. And it corresponds to Christianity's and Judaism's one God, China's Tao, Blavatsky's one life, Paramita's the divine reality or prajna, and the right view from Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. This is seeing that we are all one. So viveka gives us discrimination to decide if we want to follow the golden rule, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us, the principle of unity, or let our defenses come up where we resist changing our behavior, or if we ignore how we're coming across to people. So I'd like to share a story that exemplifies this discrimination. And it was written about in the Reader's Digest in the 60s. And it was an article about the US government's foremost expert of discerning counterfeit money. Excuse me. He was the foremost expert, and his word was final, whether money was real or counterfeit. And the interviewer asked him how he learned this, whether he studied all sorts of counterfeit money. And he said, no, he spent his time studying real money. So when something was fake, he could spot it in an instant. So if we surround ourselves with the finest ideas, inspiring art, good music, and people who display qualities of selflessness with us and our family, our friends, we can develop ourselves little by little to become our higher self. So I'd like to share another story that exemplifies the discrimination in viveka. And this story is from Japan, the concubine in the mirror. Once upon a time, there was a young man who loved his parents very much. He grew up, left home, met a young woman whom he fell in love with, and married. But shortly afterward, his father died, and he grieved for him very much. One day, the young man had to go to Tokyo on business, and after he conducted his work, as he was preparing to return home, he passed by a mirror shop. Wondering what unusual things were sold there, he went in to look around. As he gazed into one of the mirrors, he was surprised to find his father there. So he bought the mirror, took it home, and put it in his prayer room and prayed before it every day. Now his wife started wondering why he was spending so much time in his prayer room and decided to have a look for herself. As she gazed in the mirror, she saw the face of a young woman looking back at her, and she became angry and accused her husband of bringing a concubine home and keeping her inside a gold frame. But the young man replied that it was his dead father in the mirror, but the wife was convinced otherwise. As they were arguing, a nun came by, heard the dispute, and offered to help. She looked in the mirror, saw her own reflection, and turned to the couple and said that the woman had repented and become a nun, so the wife could pardon her. With that, the argument ended. So this demonstrates viveka, or discrimination. And it's also illustrated in the ancient Greek aphorism, know thyself, which is inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece. And another well-known saying that makes the same point is from Shakespeare in Hamlet. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. So moving to the second proven way to become your higher self, I've picked Vairagya, and I've given you a hint about this. Now, this is a quality that is desirelessness or detachment. The word literally means uncoloredness from the root raga, or emotionally tinged color. So with the prefix on the word, Vairagya means seeing the world uncolored by our emotions. Now we have many expressions in our day-to-day language that relate colors to emotions. You've all heard of seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, having a cheerfulness or optimism. Another expression is feeling in the pink, or feeling happy and healthy. Or another difficult feeling is being green with envy, or having jealousy. Or having the blues, feeling sad or melancholy. Or being in a black mood, depressed, angry, or irritable. Or seeing red if a sudden anger comes up and gets the better of us. So Vairagya is seeing people, things, and events uncolored by our emotions and in a state of acceptance, which brings peace and other positive feelings. It prevents us from being brought down if we're disappointed when something in life doesn't turn out the way we hoped. It's an easygoingness with life. As I mentioned, Vairagya is also the second virtue of Shankaracharya, one of the paramitas of Buddhism. It's in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the 5 guidelines in aparigraha, not holding on to things. And it's in the 10 commandments, thou shalt not covet. So you can see how common of a principle it is and something very useful to keep in mind. Now, Vairagya doesn't mean that we shouldn't appreciate the pleasures of the senses. We can still enjoy eating good food or hearing wonderful music or being with friends and family. It just means we shouldn't get attached. This slide says it well. It asks whether a monk can use email, and the response is yes, but with no attachments. Because life has so much change, we need to be accepting of what comes our way. So I'd like to share a story that exemplifies this, and it's called Good Fortune. Once upon a time, there was a Russian farmer whose horse ran away. And all of his neighbors said how sorry they were for his bad luck. But the farmer said, "How do you know this isn't good fortune?" The next day, the horse came back with another horse. And the neighbor said how lucky the farmer was for his good fortune. But the farmer said wisely, "How do you know this is good fortune?" The farmer gave the second horse to his son, and as he was trying to train it, he was bucked off and he broke his leg. And once again, the neighbors said how sorry they were for his bad luck. But the farmer said, "How do you know this isn't good fortune?" Soon after, all able-bodied men were conscripted into the army, and 90% were killed. And the neighbors once again said how lucky the man was his son didn't have to go to war. But the farmer said, "How do you know this is good fortune?" Now, this is the end of the story, but it really could go on because maybe the father wasn't easy to get along with, or the son was really crabby. So the key is having detachment or vairagya and acceptance of life circumstances. So the third proven way to become our higher selves, and what I'd like to do is use the levels of consciousness that we're taught and pick a guideline that goes with each level of consciousness. So I'll start with the physical body, and what I've picked is Dhamma. Now that is the second of Shankara's 6 treasures, and it's self-restraint. And it's the control of the senses of the body and the desires that come up with them. And then the subsequent behaviors that arise from this. Now, Dhamma includes the concept of power and strength. And we need this when we're subjugating our senses and restraining ourselves from acting on strong emotion, maybe if anger comes up. And it has a meaning of conquering. That's conquering our unfettered actions and strong passions, which we may regret, particularly if we're controlling our anger, so we don't get into an amygdala hijack. On the other side is conquering our wants, so we don't spend too much money. And it also has the meaning of endurance as we withstand self-denial, as we act in proper ways. We may have to hold ourselves back from using sarcasm or a negative judgment of others through the amygdala. Now, another way that Dhamma is defined is peaceful action. And this slide shows how universal this is, as the book on the left is from Russia. Then the book on the right is from the United States. And then the Peaceful Actions platform, so that it's a universal guideline. So we've seen these guidelines are similar with the principles of nonviolence. And I love that gun. Not lying or telling the truth, and then not stealing. It all boils down to Dhamma, or right action, from Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So I'd like to share a story that exemplifies Dhamma, or peaceful right action. And it's the story of Farmer Fleming, and it's a true story. Farmer Fleming was a poor Scottish farmer, and one day while working in his fields, he heard a cry coming from a nearby bog. There, mired to his waist in black muck, was a terrified boy screaming and struggling to free himself. and Farmer Fleming saved the lad from what could have been his death, and the boy was very grateful. The next day, a fancy carriage pulled up to the Scotsman's sparse surroundings, and an elegantly dressed gentleman stepped out and introduced himself as the father of the boy Farmer Fleming had saved. And the nobleman said, "I want to repay you for saving my son." But the farmer said, "No, I can't accept payment for what I did." And he replied, waving off the offer. At that moment, the farmer's son came to the door of the family's home. "Is that your son?" the nobleman asked. "Yes," the farmer said proudly. "I'll make you a deal," the nobleman said. "Let me provide your son with the same level of education that my son will enjoy. And if the lad is anything like his father, he will surely grow into a man we will both be proud of." And that he did. He attended the very best schools and graduated from St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London, and went on to become known throughout the world as Sir Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of penicillin. Years afterward, the son of the nobleman, who years before had been saved from the bog, was stricken with pneumonia. And what saved his life this time? Penicillin. And the name of the nobleman was Lord Randolph Churchill, and his son's name, Sir Winston Churchill. And what goes around comes around. So moving to the fourth proven way to become your higher self. Again, I'm corresponding these to the levels of consciousness, and I'm picking one that corresponds with the emotions. And what I've decided on is Dana, the first paramita of Buddhism. Now, Dana means charity and love immortal. And it comes from the same root as our word donation. So it's a givingness. With charity, it shows that we are to be kind and understanding and tolerant and helping others. So Dana corresponds to the third paramita, Kshanti, or patience, sweet, which not can ruffle, and also to the fourth commandment of honoring thy father and thy mother by showing love in this way to them. And it relates to the second commandment, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, not to condemn anyone with our anger or swearing. And with our work on the emotions to become one with the higher self, it relates to Santosha, or contentment, from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the second personal guideline. And the slide says contentment is a choice. And we do have the power to become that. It relates to right effort from the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. And you can see it really needs right effort for the man to span those cliffs. Wonderful picture. And it also is the fifth paramita of Virya. It corresponds as Dana, charity, and love, which Virya is heroism and courage. Now we need Virya if we hear gossip and we don't want to repeat it. We have to hold ourselves back. Or if we hear a joke or a put down about somebody or a particular group of people, and we express in some way that it isn't right to do that. And it takes courage to go against the kind of the group think. Dana also relates to titiksha. That's the fourth of Shankara's 6 treasures, and that's endurance and not grumbling about something we're having to deal with. And even if others are grumbling, and it involves a cheerfulness, even if we feel defeated, and it's just plain perseverance, titiksha. And Dana also relates to Shraddha, the 6th of Shankara's treasures, and that's faith or confidence that we're on the right path and will benefit from whatever we're going through or whatever we're doing. So all of these guidelines help us deal with our emotions. So I'd like to share a story relating to our emotions and how they could give us some trouble. And this is a Native American legend and called The Spider and the Hawk. Once upon a time, a spider made friends with a hawk. And the spider decided that he wanted to see the world from above. So he asked the hawk if he could take a ride on his back. And the hawk agreed. And the spider enjoyed the view from above, but he quickly became bored and decided to have some fun at the hawk's expense. Now, there's no cuss words in the Sioux language, but there's a sign language, and there's one that indicates a put down. So when the hawk encountered another bird, maybe a magpie or an eagle, the spider made the sign that the hawk was quite a stupid fellow. Now the spider thought the hawk would never know because he was sitting behind his head. But the hawk saw his shadow and the spider making fun of him. So to put an end to that, the hawk suddenly turned over, so the spider fell off and landed inside a crack in a hollow of an old tree. And it started to rain. And because the tree was very dry, it soaked up the water easily and began to swell, so that the spider was being crushed to death. And the spider cried out, "Why do I do these things? Forgive me, Great Spirit, for making fun of the hawk." The spider felt very small indeed because of his pride and wickedness. And his humility made him so small, he was able to crawl out of the stump. So the moral of the story is a little humility, self-knowledge, and prayer can be a good thing sometimes. So moving to the 5th proven way to become your higher self, I'm corresponding it with the levels of consciousness and picking one that goes with the mind. And what I've decided on is Shama. Now that's the first of Shankara's 6 treasures, and it's calmness of mind, having a stillness, equanimity, tranquility. Now, Shama literally means level or even. So it is intentionally cultivating an inner attitude of peace and calm, which helps us not be swayed or thrown off our center or levelness by our emotions or our reactions to events going on around us. Just as we hold our minds still and focus as we pick up broken glass, we need to practice holding our minds in a state of quietude where we don't get upset by emotions or memories or flustered by other feelings. Now, there's a wonderful African proverb that emphasizes the same thing. Talking stops when walking through thorns. The proverb says we need to be mindful of how we're walking so that we don't get stuck with a thorn. Just as we need to be mindful of what we let enter our minds. Shama corresponds to right intention of Buddhism, in that when we intend to control our thinking, we can do it. Wayne Dyer, the American self-help and spiritual teacher, said, "Our intention creates our reality." And there's really a lot of power with our intention, and it works together with the will. Shankaracharya taught us that the mind is the commander of the senses. Now, the senses are commonly what prompt us to action from desire and other emotions that get stimulated from our bodies, like looking for comfort or having a wonderful experience from a trip or a concert. This is kama manas. But our awareness can keep our minds and our emotions calm. With Shama, the mind is controlled and quiet so that it can be centered on Atman. And this is Uparati from the Shankara's 6 treasures. And Uparati comes from the root to rest. And this is to rest in Atman. As we discussed earlier, Vairagya is needed to help us attain Shama, the quiet mind. As we let go of attachments, as the slide shows, we can be freed from things that bog our minds down, and we can let go of resentments that can just seem to pop up in our minds on their own. We can let go of them and let them slip through our fingers, just like sand. Then our minds can be quiet, and there's such a wonderful peace from a tranquil mind. Shama also corresponds to Patanjali's 4th guideline, Swadhyaya. Now that's self-study of spiritual works, but it can include studying ourselves and what comes up into our minds, as well as how we behave. So we can decide what we think and how we act. So I'd like to share a story that exemplifies how important it is to control what we think. And this story is 2 monks on a journey. A senior monk and a junior monk were traveling together. At one point, they came to a river with a strong current. As monks, as they were preparing to cross the river, a young, beautiful woman approached them and asked them if they could help her cross to the other side. Now, the 2 monks glanced at each other because they had taken a vow never to touch a woman. Then, without a word, the older monk picked the woman up and carried her on his back to the other side. Then he gently placed her down and went about his journey. Now, the younger monk could not believe what had just happened. After rejoining his companion, he was speechless, and an hour passed without a word. 2 more hours passed, and the young monk was still thinking about what just happened. Then 3 hours passed, and finally the monk could not contain himself any longer, and he blurted out, "As monks, we are not permitted to touch a woman. How could you carry that woman on your back?" And the older monk looked at him compassionately and replied, "Brother, I set her down at the side of the river many hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Again, Shama or calmness of mind is the key. So the sixth proven way to become your higher self is, and I'm corresponding to the levels of consciousness and using one that goes with buddhi or intuition. And what I've picked is samadhana, the fifth of the treasures of Shankaracharya. And that's concentration on pure being and becoming one-pointed. And this is accessed through meditation and its single-minded focus. In meditation, we start with pratyahara, or withdrawal of attention from sense objects. Now, pratyahara comes from the root prati, which means to withdraw, and ahara, which means food or anything that consumes our mind, such as what our bodies are feeling like when we're meditating, maybe if we're warm or cold, or it even can be with what we want to accomplish after we're done meditating. So pratyahara is withdrawing our attention from all of that. And we continue with self-surrender to our higher self through Ishvara Pranidhana. That's Patanjali's fifth guideline, the Niyamas. Now, Ishvara is our higher self, and Pranidhana means fixing. So it's letting go of everything except our internal experience of meditation. Samadhana means complete concentration on the divine. And if we do this often for meditation, it improves our ability to meditate the next time, as well as it influences our normal way of functioning in the world, and we're more in touch with our higher self. And it corresponds to the Buddhist right mindfulness and right concentration. Samadhana corresponds to dharana from Sanskrit or India. That's concentration, and deeper meditation is dhyana or contemplation. And that's Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The theosophical writer Clara Codd wrote a book called The Way of the Disciple, and she discusses Shankara's Hindu virtues there and relates them to our everyday life. And it's an excellent, easy to read book, not too long, and I totally recommend it. Now, she gives us excellent advice to begin meditation. She says, take a short time in the morning, as it sets a rhythm for the whole day, when you can be still and alone. Let your mind seek and ponder to respond to the invisible potencies around you and within you. When your mind is truly quiet, it allows you to perceive the impressions from the higher self. So moving to the seventh proven way to become your higher self, and I'm corresponding it with the Atman, the levels of consciousness, and I've picked the fourth of Shankara's virtues, love or mumukshutvam. Now that's devotion and desire for union with the higher self. And it corresponds to samadhi, the eighth of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and it's a state of meditation of total absorption in the self. It also includes a strong desire and intention to unite with Atman and get off the rounds of birth and death through reincarnation. And this is accomplished through meditation and samadhi. Now, samadhi is a compound word that comes from the two roots shama, which is the calm mind. And we just defined it as the fifth proven way to become your higher self. And it also is from the root D, or from buddhi, the intuition, referring to the intuition of our higher mind, of our spiritual self. Now, this slide shows devout monk and nuns who were dedicated to prayer and meditation in Christianity, Saints Catherine of Siena and Teresa of Avila, and then Saint John of the Cross. Now, there are many others, including Buddha, who shows his love and unity as he blesses us every year at the festival of Wesak. These pictures show his aura and the love flowing to us. Lastly, these quotes from Krishnamurti, the spiritual teacher who at 14 wrote the little theosophical book At the Feet of the Master. And he writes about meditation and becoming one with the higher self. He wrote, standing at the beach with the waves and the wind coming in, you feel there is nothing between you and the sky. You are lost in the beauty. You see not only with your eyes, but also with your heart. This openness is meditation, and there's no resistance, no barriers. Meditation is the explosion of love. This love knows no separation. To it, far is near. It is a state of love when and which all division ceases. The beauty of love is not in you or outside you, but everywhere. So this completes the 7 proven ways to become your higher self. And to summarize, they include viveka, or discernment between the real and the Atman, the real, the Atman, and the unreal, our everyday life. And vairagya, that's desirelessness and non-attachment. Then as I related them to our bodies, the lower levels of consciousness is, I've picked for the body, Dhamma, self-restraint and peaceful action. And then the next level of consciousness are emotions. I picked Dana, charity and love, immortal. And then for the mind, I picked Shama, that's calmness of mind, tranquility. And then for the Buddhic level, our intuition, samadhana, concentration on pure being in meditation. Then lastly, love, or mumukshutvam, desire in becoming, to become one with Atman. That's from Shankaracharya. So thank you, and the best to you as you become one with your higher self.